We are Tailgate Talk. Welcome into the show. I'm Matt Thomas. Guys are still on sabbatical, but so you don't have to listen to me drone on, we brought in Pat Sweda, our friend from Nittany Central. Pat, it's been a while since we've been on the show, but it's been even longer since you've been on the show. So how are things going?
Pretty good. Just keeping up with the basketball team. If it's keeping the days passing until September rolls around.
Yeah, it's been a crazy couple of weeks, specifically, these last 2 or 3 weeks for Penn State athletics, but certainly always something to talk about with football. So let's kick off there first before we dive into the heartthrob of all of Nittany Nation with the basketball team. But we are recording on Tuesday. Spring practice started today on March 14th. But last night, the 13th, some news was made when James Franklin announced that Dion Barnes was going to be the new defensive line coach, replacing John Scott Jr., who went to the Detroit Lions about 2 weeks ago. I'll just toss it over to you, Pat. What are your initial reactions to that?
I think it was a good hire. It's who I probably would have went with from the start. But the fact that it took this long for the announcement that came to come out makes me think that there were a few that fell through, at least from the NFL ranks, that maybe we couldn't get the money together, or maybe they just decided to stay put where they were. But ultimately, I mean, I grew up watching Dion Barnes, so like naturally, I'm like, oh, cool, a name that I recognize, and it's always good to hire within. I feel like.
Yeah. So a little bit of way of background for those that may not be as up to date. So Dion Barnes played what was it 2012 to 2014, I think. He
It
was he
was
was
somewhere in that. Yep.
he was Joe Pa's last recruiting class, I know. So that's like right at that 2011 frame. But NFL for a little bit, didn't really pan out there. Went back to Northeast High School in Philadelphia, his alma mater, where he was a coach for I think a year or two. Then has been a GA with the program for 3 years and was just made an analyst like 2 months ago because the GA window had passed. So, yeah, I'm kind of with you. Like it's the most logical option. Like he's right there. The players rave about him, all that kind of stuff. My only concern is it too soon? Like I think he's going to be a good coach one day. Like don't get me wrong, but it's just kind of like he's never been a coach. It's been such a abbreviated stint at this level. You know, he's a superstar from what I understand, but you know,
Yeah, I think that when you hire from within, it's a weird like balance because you don't want to end up like, I mean, the way Clemson's gone these last few years, like where Dabo was like, I only hire from within. If you don't get any new blood in your program, then sometimes the ideas become stale. It's just kind of the coaches are kind of just spitting back what Franklin or whoever the head coach is wants to hear. But I think Franklin, for the most part, has done a good job of balancing who you hire from within and going out and like getting a different wide receiver coach. So I think that if he really thinks that Barnes is the guy, then I guess we're gonna have to wait and see. I mean, Larry Johnson was one of the best D line coaches that we ever had, and he was only brought on because we wanted his son. So for the
yeah,
you never really know where like the best guys are going to come from. But
yeah, yeah, and you miss out a little bit on that, new coach bump with recruiting and that kind of stuff. But at the same time, he might be a little bit more, relatable to these younger kids who, I mean, he was, not even done playing at Penn State a decade ago. So I I'll be interested to see how it works out. It's kind of like a year like 2023 could be. It's a risk. It certainly is a risk. Um, Now on top of that, you have to basically replace that entire room. So um, Franklin did say today in the press conference that Torrance Brown is going to fill that grad assistant role. So that's another player, bringing back into the program. And then you'll have to fill the analyst role that Barnes was in for 6 weeks. So I think that is probably, I don't know what your thoughts are. That's a position where you probably want to go get someone who has experience, maybe a former coach somewhere that, is either at a lower level or, is retired, bring them back, and that, especially because they can now coach on field practices and whatnot. Not that they weren't doing that to begin with, but that probably someone that could kind of be a little bit of a shadow for Barnes to start.
yeah, I think the analyst role we see it. I mean, really all over college football. It's usually a guy that you're bringing in. Maybe he was a former head coach somewhere, a former coordinator, it didn't work out, and he's trying to kind of get back in there with like a well-known program. And it's kind of just a way to get a guy in there with different ideas that might not be there for too long, but is a stepping stone back to where he wants to get to.
Yeah, and Franklin has done well with that last couple cycles. It was Ken Wisenhunt, right? That was just here and then left for, was it Alabama? I think it was Alabama,
It's
wasn't
weird with those guys because you barely even really know that they're there. They're kind of
it?
just they're around
They're
the program, but you don't really
yeah,
hear their name too often.
yeah, they're in the shadows. I think they probably prefer it that way. But um, shifting gears to now today's news with the press conference to open spring practice, the first 15 practices of 2023. Um, don't know. We're kind of just throwing things around a little bit before we jumped on here about how much was actually made of it. It's your typical coach speak kind of stuff, but is there anything in particular that stood out to you, Pat, when you listened to it today?
Um, so Franklin will never come out and necessarily say that any of his position groups are bad. I don't think. I think that's just for their own sake, the players' sake, and just you never want to seem negative. But he did mention that the interior defensive line. There was a question that was asked like early in the press conference, like, "What do you think about the depth?" And just like the way he answered it made it seem like, yeah, it's not really where we want it to be. Like, there's
Yeah.
a few good players there, but it's not really. Yeah, I think he made the comment about Donald and all that kind of stuff too. So it's
Yeah.
how every guy wants to slim down, but not everybody's built like Aaron Donald. Not really necessarily everybody could do that. I don't know. I just it gave me a little bit of hesitation of that might be one of the weaker positions this year, especially if the coach is kind of dodging around it and you know talking about the size of guys going into spring ball.
Yeah. Especially after the whole conversation about size that we had after the Michigan game last year, specifically with that position. I was getting that a little mixed up in my mind because I thought it was related to the similar comment he made about the wide receivers, where he basically said they have to get tougher and more consistent. So, and I think, I mean, obviously, we're not rocket scientists here. Anyone that's looking at the roster knows that those are the two positions that are gonna, if there's gonna be a liability this year, it's most likely gonna be one of those two. But I mean, overall, I mean, there are veteran guys there. Especially the D line, Devon Elise, Keziah Izzard, that hopefully should be able to step up and make some headway this year. That was probably the biggest thing that stood out to me, was that Franklin said that Izzard was probably not going to see a whole lot of run this spring with some injuries, bumps and bruises. So, I mean, again, when you're trying to replace PJ Mustipher, who's been there for seems like forever,
Yeah,
um, that's he's obviously a veteran guy, but you're stepping into a different role, so probably not ideal. But Drew
I
Larzo,
also thought the quarterback it was interesting because it was kind
yeah,
of like we're not going to come out and I mean I guess you expect that you don't want to feel like Aller's the guy, but was it Prabula and I guess they didn't really mention the incoming freshman Malik, but it just seemed like they were kind of keeping it like anybody could win it. They have different skill sets. I think was something that they mentioned, which I don't know. I think that's what I guess is Prabula more of like a athletic type compared to Aller from what
yeah,
I've heard, because I think some people thought he could possibly end up moving to like safety in college when he was coming out of high school. But I don't know. It's just one of those like I feel like it's just kind of like they have to say it now because it's spring ball. Maybe they're going to try to make sure that he doesn't transfer. If it's just like you name Aller quarter the starter now, it's really not going to work out. But I feel like most people kind of know where that's heading this fall. It's kind of the way that the
yeah.
trick of the trade, I guess you can call it.
with your view on the whole Clifford Aller thing last year, I'm surprised you didn't jump on Franklin's comment about it being a true quarterback competition this year. I saw some people already jumping on that online, and he finally admitted it, that it wasn't a true competition last year. But I mean, yeah, that stood out to me too. I think what beyond that, because you expect him to say, it's a competition, every position's a competition, yada yada yada. The fact that talking about trying to use Prbula in different ways, like trying to, it kind of sounded reminiscent to, what was it, the Lion package? Was that what they used with
Jeez.
Tommy Stevens, and then Will Levis? Like, it sounds like they might have, thoughts of bringing that back with Prbula. So we'll see. Like as we've been going through this whole off season and what it's going to be like, Yeah, I think Alar is going to be the starter. Like, I think everybody recognizes that, but Prabula is not going to take it lying down. Like, he's good. Like, he's athletic. I think he will be the starting quarterback at Penn State one day. Whether
You
that's,
do?
I
I don't
do.
know.
Like, I do. I mean, unless Alar just goes off and that starts a wave of 5-star quarterbacks wanting to come to Penn State, like, again, it's hard. You don't want to use the comparisons because they're not always accurate or always fair to anybody, but it's similar to, in a certain way, to the Hackenberg and McSorley kind of thing, where you have the guy with the raw talent and all that kind of stuff, and then you just have the guy who was scrappy and he's just gonna,
What what years? What years? He's the same class as
yeah,
Aller, isn't he?
yeah. So
Huh. I'm just did
theoretically, you're
redshirt.
gonna, yeah, they both red. Well, I guess Allard in red shirt, but he's a red shirt, so you're probably gonna have him potentially be ready to start as a red shirt junior in 2025, presumably. All things go according to plan.
Yeah.
All
Yeah, I
things
guess if
go. Go ahead.
according to plan, Aller gets drafted, leaves after 3 years. Yeah, I think that would
Yeah,
be some good things would happen if he gets drafted in 3 years. But
yeah. That's what I was gonna say. All things go according to plan. Bo Pebrula is gonna be the new starting quarterback defending a national title in 2025. So, uh, um, yeah. So like that stood out. The comment about Izzard stood out. Um, they keep talking about leadership. Like leadership's gonna be the theme of this off season, which it's fair. Like you have a lot of young guys and a lot of young guys that have played a lot, but you have a lot, you lose that core, that when you get kicked in the mouth at Michigan or you lose that tough game to Ohio State, that's going to pick you back up and keep you going. So that's going to be interesting to see, I think, as the season gets going this year. Who steps up. um Anything else that stood out to you while I'm kind of scanning through what his
but
comments were, and see?
I know you're joking, but do you think that this year's team or the 2024 team would actually be more set up for a run toward a, I mean, I guess you could say 2024 would be expanded playoff, but national championship contender? Because I almost think that like this year, depending on where Drew Aller's at, you're going to be losing some guys next year, especially on the offensive line. I know everybody thinks immediately like, oh, junior year is like the year, but as far as like well-rounded roster, it kind of feels like this year's gonna have a better squad.
Yeah, yeah, I see that. I mean, like the offensive line specifically maybe doesn't concern me because you've got, Olu's leaving, but you have Drew Shelton, you have, the guys that are just coming in this 2023 class, Jevin Williams, who hopefully by that point should be rounding into form, and
That's true.
so like, but again, they'll be first time starters, so you don't know what that you're going to get there. I mean, you do just have a lot of unknowns this year, but even just outside of us in general, you have Ohio State who's breaking in, a new quarterback. Michigan is probably going to be tough again, but having them at home, I feel like that's a matchup that favors us, or at least would lean in our favor. So you could make the argument this year. I mean, I think you certainly could, but
It's
yeah,
tough because in almost every metric preseason, we're a top 10 team, a lot of times a top 5 team, but then you'll see us at fifth, and two of the teams ahead of us are, the two in our division. So it's like you could end up having another 10-2 season, and it'll be like, this is terrible. And similar to last year, the two teams you lost to were, in the playoff again. But I
yeah,
don't know. As the life of
and
a Penn State fan,
yeah, and 10-2 next year won't fly, but
no.
like it almost, and I trying to figure out how to put this. I feel like I'm making the argument for everyone who is against expansion by saying this, but I almost kind of feel like if we do, like, even if we make the playoff and it's 2024 this first year, does it almost kind of feel a little bit cheapened by the fact that it's a 12 team? Like, well, let me rephrase it in a positive way. Does making the playoff in this year in 2023 mean more than making it in 2024?
I think anytime you make a 4-team field over a 12-team field,
Yeah.
it's going to be, especially with no auto bids, and it's just like, these are who we think the 4 best teams are based on body of work. It'll probably feel better. It depends on what. if they made a run in the 20, like what if they made the semifinals in 2024? That
Yeah,
would mean that you probably had to win at least one game, maybe two, depending on where you're seated at. I think that's the only way you could say would maybe match it because you're getting to essentially the same spot, but you also had the thrill of winning a game or two in this new expanded playoff. But I mean,
yeah.
I do understand what people say with that. It's going to feel a little bit cheapened, but I don't know. At some point, nobody really plays in these bowl games anymore. So
Yeah. Yeah. No,
what
I
do you
mean,
have to do?
overall, hopefully it will help. Like, but that's a discussion for another time.
Yeah.
Let me throw this one out to you. I've brought it up on the show in the past, but get your thoughts. What do you think would be more beneficial for the program long term this year? Make the playoff or Drew Lar wins the Heisman or is at least at the ceremony?
I mean, if he wins it, the way it's been going recently, the guys that have been winning it have been on pretty good
Go.
teams. So I guess
Don't you say Coco. When I asked that question, Coco said, "Well, Caleb Williams won it this year, and they're always in the the Heisman winner's always in the playoff." And it was the week
no,
after, and he didn't realize that they were in the playoff. But anyway,
not not always, but they're usually like in contention. So I
yeah,
guess you could, he could like light it up, but they could lose to like Ohio State and Michigan, go 10-2. But his stats would be so crazy that they're like, this guy has to win it. But I don't know. I still think making the playoff would be, as long as he's not like bad or like a complete game manager and he shows like flashes. I think if you make the playoffs, you're probably gonna have to win the Big Ten. So I guess you can't really be too bad unless Singleton and Allen and the running game's just so crazy that he doesn't have to do anything. So I would probably lean making the playoff because let's be honest, like the team aspect of it is always gonna supersede any kind of individual accomplishments for me.
yeah. My argument for Alar is one what you already like. If he's it works both ways. If you're in Heisman contention, you're probably having a pretty good season as a team. Or if you're having a pretty good team, a playoff caliber worthy season, you're probably going to have a player that's at least kind of on that cusp. But I think long term, the Heisman might be more beneficial because that one position that's been holding Penn State back for what 10
That's
years
true.
now is quarterback. So if you could get over that hump and show that, yeah, we can bring in a high level quarterback and get them to play to that level, like I think long term that might actually be more beneficial.
So it's kind of
So
like, would you rather have Caleb Williams or like a JJ McCarthy where they have the team success? And he's a
yeah,
good quarterback, and I think he's been getting better, but obviously he's not anywhere close to the level of Caleb Williams. That's kind of like the best comparison, I feel like, last year of what you would want. So I guess, I don't know, it depends on how you think either one will set up the program long term. But if they're making the playoff every year, or gosh, they should be almost every year in the 12-team playoff.
yeah,
Maybe next year's 14 will kind of be a forgotten thing in 5-10 years. I don't know.
yeah, yeah. That's a good
But the
point too.
Heisman, I mean, we've only won one Heisman in the history of the team. So that's one of
Yeah,
those things that's people still
that
talk
yeah,
about Johnny Manziel, and that wasn't even that good of a team
yeah,
at A&M.
exactly. Just to clarify, so that people don't get upset, I'm not saying that Drew Lar is going to win the Heisman because it seems like anytime you even reference that Drew Lar might be good at football, everyone just gets upset. But
it's it's the Hackenberg, Anthony Morelli, Rob
yeah,
Bolden, the history of 5-star quarterbacks that have not panned out. People are a little too much PTSD from that.
yeah. The comment that always gets me is like, "Oh, you're putting too much pressure on him." Like, do you think he's actually? You think he doesn't know? Like, it's just it's going to be news to him that he's
He seems
actually
like he seems like very cool, calm, and collected when he's been put into situations. I don't know. I just like that very first game against Purdue last year. That's the one that sticks out where he had to go in for that drive when Sean had to go to the locker room, and I'm just like, he doesn't seem like he's rattled at all. He's like, all right, run whatever play you want me to run here, and I'm fine with it. It's a tight game. It's whatever.
yeah.
But
Yeah. Michigan,
we'll see.
though, Michigan was a little like you could tell it was kind of deer in headlights kind of thing. But I mean, again, he's a freshman. He's 18 years old. So we'll see.
Yeah, on the road too and stuff sometimes when it's those kind of teams.
Yeah. Um, anything else football related that you want to hit on? I think we pretty much touched on everything that was noteworthy coming out of today's news. Uh, I don't really have anything if you're good.
Yeah, that's pretty much it from what I've
All right.
seen.
All right. Let's hit what everyone wants to talk about. Penn State basketball. Going back to the
Of
big
course.
dance for the first time in 12 years, 2011, 12 years.
Yep.
So
2011.
so you were at the Big Ten championship game. So why don't you fill us in what that was like, what that trip was like, the experience, and kind of big picture what's going on with Penn State basketball.
I was. So I actually was also at the one in 2011. That was where this like tradition of going to Big Ten championship started. And then we went to the football one in 16, obviously. It was like, oh, let's go out. You know, they've never won it when if they ever do win it, want to be there for like the first one kind of. So, you know, when they beat Indiana on what was it, Saturday night, we're like, all right, my dad and I were like, all right, I guess we're going, and drove out there. It sucks as this year is in Chicago. It's a little bit extra 2 or so hours versus when it was in Indianapolis, but I'd never been to Chicago before. Nice city. The river was dyed green for St. Patrick's Day, which was cool. Cool to see after the game. As far as the game itself, that was painful to watch. Not just the ending, but just man, when the shots are not falling, it's a hard product to watch because
Yeah.
they'll keep shooting, but they'll keep shooting the threes, and you're hoping that eventually they can catch fire. I don't think Purdue's that good from what I've seen in person. It's just a very like I don't know the way the Edie's officiated, um, and their guards. If I was a Purdue fan, which I think a lot of them are terrified by their freshman guards heading into the NCAA tournament. But it was a fun experience. The United Center was cool. You know, got all the Jordan championship banners hanging up, and you know his number retired and all that kind of stuff. Overall, it was a good experience. But I had a different um, change of perception for Purdue fans, and that was that they reminded me of Ohio State football fans in the way that they acted a little bit, which is weird because they don't win anything for the most part. I mean, they don't go to Final Fours like you know, if it was like Michigan State, Michigan, like a lot of those teams that have had success recently, but they were like every single foul call, it was like, you know, a foul on Purdue is like, how can you call it this way? You know, you know, this is ridiculous. There's no way that he fouled him, all this kind of stuff. And I'm looking up at the fouls, like, oh man, you must think that they're getting robbed. And the fouls are like Penn State 10, you know, Purdue 6. You're like, okay, so like this, you know, this really isn't that, you know, unfairly uh, officiated game. But I don't. There's just one particular guy that was sitting behind me that was just losing his mind the entire game, and I really, really wanted Winter to hit that final shot, you know, to win the game on a 3-pointer because there was definitely a chance that I was going to turn around and just kind of smile at him at being like the only Penn State fans in the section I was sitting in. But I don't know. I'm glad they fought at the end, made it close, made it interesting. But maybe we'll have to wait another 11, 12 years to have to make it back. We'll see.
Yeah. Well, we'll see what happens with Shrews, but yeah, I mean, I think regardless, like you can't, even though you lose, you can't discount what the last month has been. Like it's just unbelievable. We're sitting here like almost literally a month to the day, February 14th, where they lose 4 in a row, and you're just like, they're not even gonna make the NIT. Like maybe the CBI if they're lucky. And then they rattle off what 7 out of 9, like 5, or is it 6 quad one wins? I don't know the number, like
A lot.
riding the game updates for Basic Blues Nation. It's like you get the pregame stuff, and then you're doing the math. All right, what's it going to be if they win? And it's I don't remember the number, but
I think my after the 4 game losing streak, my article was the team's NCAA tournament hopes is on life support. And then
yeah,
like from that point on, it was like, okay, now we won like a couple games against Ohio State, Minnesota. I'm like, whatever, they stink. And then they started beating good teams. I was like, okay, maybe there's a chance. They
yeah,
can win one game in the tournament, and then they go all the way to the finals. So
yeah. I felt like I kept using the same line over and over and over again. It's like NCAA tournament hopes live to fight another day or something like that. But I think the difference is, one, you said like how the threes weren't falling and they're just going to keep shooting, but they've figured out a way to get stay in game is not a right word because they've had to do comebacks, but get into games and in some cases win games when the shots aren't falling. Like Maryland to close out the regular season was the same kind of thing where they just were not shooting well. They were not moving at all on offense. And they're down 10 for pretty much the entire second half, and then the next thing you look
Mhm.
up and it's a 2-point game with 10 seconds left. So like that is big, and hopefully that, you want the shots to fall, but that's a positive. And I think they finally figured out a way to play some level of defense against bigger guys. Like that was for me the most frustrating thing about January, where it's just like anytime there's
Mhm.
someone over 6'7", it's just forget it.
So they've played, if you, especially like when you watch them in person, the help defense. When they get it to a big guy in the post. Now Edie was a little different because
Yeah, you
he's
can't.
just a
Yeah,
he's a monster human, and you know also he can bulldoze people, and they're not going to call it. But I'm not going to get into that
yeah,
part. But for the most part, like your typical bigs, they've done a great job of, even, I mean, most of the time they'll have like their tallest guy on the floor will be Lundy at 6'6", and then maybe like Dredd and Pickett are 6'4", and that'll be like they'll be matched up on guys that are 6, 7 inches taller than them. But the help defense has kind of made it that it keeps these teams at the perimeter, which I think for most teams, typically they're not going to shoot as well from three as even a team like Penn State. I think that's a success we've seen in the last, I don't know, month and a half.
yeah, yeah. Most of the time you have Dread on. Was Dread on Edie at all on Sunday? I feel like he was
Yeah,
at one
he
point.
got called
Yeah,
for a foul or two, and I remember him looking at the ref like, because it was down in our end of the floor, and he's just like, "What do you want me to do? Like, I'm literally a foot shorter than him. Like, he's elbowing me, like get position in the paint, and I'm just here, just getting destroyed." But they called him for, I don't know, having his arm on his back or something. I don't know.
yeah,
That was
yeah.
it's a frustrating team to play. I think most Big Ten fans would tend to agree. And I found that even before leaving the game, every single fan of other teams was rooting against Purdue. I guess for
Yeah.
the underdog aspect, but also a lot of them just like Iowa, Indiana, obviously, Illinois, like they just hate Purdue, which I was not aware of in the basketball
That's,
world.
yeah. I mean, I could see it. It makes sense. But this team just has like the amount of fight that they've shown over the last, month, where it's like every single one of those tournament games are just like, all right, well, this is over. Like, here we go. Like, it was nice, and then they just find a way to hang in it. Uh, so they play Thursday night, crack of freaking midnight, pretty much 10 o'clock
It might be midnight when it tips off. Who knows?
against Texas A&M. What do you think about that one?
Well, I think we got screwed on the seeding, and I would say that A&M probably feels that too, even. But I mean, I think the latest AP poll, A&M was number 17 in the country, and they just made the SEC championship game. Most people had them as a 5 seed. That the fact that that's the kind of team we're playing as in a 10-7 matchup kind of stinks for the first time, in the tournament in 12 years. But I mean, we just beat Indiana. We hung with Purdue. We beat other solid teams down the stretch like Maryland and Illinois and teams like that. So I mean, it's not that this team can't win. It's a very difficult matchup. And then even if they do get past them, which obviously never overlook your opponent, I think Texas is probably, I don't know, top 4 or 5 team in the entire bracket.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. Get thrown into the Midwest, where it's just like, oh god, that there's like three teams that could easily go to the Final Four in that regional. But we'll see. I mean, hey, I guess beggars can't be choosers.
I'm just happy to be here.
Yeah,
I hope that they can pull out a win or two, but I'd say it's good that we can finally add another year up to the banner up in the by the black curtain of the BJC.
when was the last time they won a game in tournament? Was it one of those early, like late 90, early 2000s team?
2001, they made the
Yeah.
Sweet 16 because
Oh yeah, that's right.
they upset the 2 seed. I think we were a 7 that year. We upset number 2 UNC, but then we proceeded to lose to the 11 seed Temple. So we've actually been knocked out by Temple the last 2 times we've been in the tournament, which is upsetting in its own right.
Yeah. Well, not gonna happen this year. But final question, then we'll do last call and get out of here. What do you think about the rumors with Shrewsbury potentially connected to Georgetown, potentially connected to Notre Dame? What do you think?
I mean, it makes a lot of sense. The Notre Dame one was the one that was floated out there. Like, even when we weren't playing well, he was getting floated out there for Notre Dame,
Yeah.
and that's kind of ramped up. From everything I saw, I just saw something earlier today that they're actually pursuing Chris Holtman from Ohio State.
Mm,
So
Yeah.
maybe we'll get lucky and maybe they'll, which I don't know why he would leave. He's got a great recruiting class coming in and everything. Good team coming back, I think. But maybe they'll take him. It makes Notre Dame one makes a lot of sense. I mean, he was a high school coach in South Bend at a Catholic school. I mean, he's coached as an assistant under Brad Stevens at Butler. He was at Purdue under Matt Painter. So he's an Indiana guy through and through. So that's the job that probably scares me the most. The Georgetown one I could see. I mean, it's a known brand. I think he's one of their top 2 or 3 leading candidates. Ed Cooley from Providence was another one I saw. That one's weird. I wrote an article about it where I was like, I don't know if that's necessarily going to be it might be a better job right now, but I'm not sure if it will be in like 5 years, just because of the TV revenue that's going to be coming through for these athletic departments as a whole. When you're in like a Big Ten or an SEC, I looked up and it was like their next TV deal they're expecting, which is 2025, couple years. It's going to be like 6 to 8 million for the Big East teams, and the Big Ten is going to be bringing in like 57 or whatever the exact number is. And obviously, a lot of that's for football, but take a little chunk off of that, and you can easily match whatever the Big East would be getting. So the Georgetown one's interesting, but who knows? I don't know what kind of wealthy donors they have to to potentially throw extra money at that. A lot of the Penn State donors won't because they're so focused on football. I hope he
Yeah.
doesn't leave, but from a lot of stuff I've seen, it seems like he might be out the door already. Just finishing out the tournament. But this is where you have to have faith in Pat Kraft, I guess.
Yeah. It's gonna be tough. Like, hopefully maybe they can make a run and that can help sway things, maybe bring some of that donor support in. But it's just everyone knows it. It's so hard to have a good basketball team at Penn State. Like, unless it's a Saturday game, you're not going to have a crowd. Just like
Mm-hmm.
facilities and that kind of stuff you can overcome. But it's the Big Ten's a tough conference. It's sledding uphill unless you're going to really make a commitment to it. So we'll see though. Hope so. Hope he could stay. So be great.
I hope he does too.
Yeah.
That
So
would be the most Penn State thing ever. For we finally get a coach everybody wants, and he's out of there in 2 years. But
yeah, but
that's how
hey,
it goes.
can always bring in someone else. So, and when in doubt, blame James Franklin. So it's usually what we do. But all right, last call. I'll go first because mine's basketball related. So I saw on Twitter yesterday, I think, that Andy Katz has Penn State going to the Elite Eight in his bracket. Does Penn State go to the Elite Eight? This is my question.
No, but I mean, Andy Katz. The thing on him is he's a very Big Ten homer. I mean, he basically works for the Big Ten Network.
Yeah.
So it's hard for when he's got an Elite Eight of Indiana and Penn State. I don't know. I couldn't take that very seriously. They're not. I wouldn't say Elite Eight. There's a chance if things go right, maybe Sweet 16. The only way I see Elite Eight is if maybe there's some upsets in that little like quadrant of teams above us, and you get to play like an 11 seed or something in the Sweet 16. But I don't know. It's going to be Texas A&M is going to be very difficult. I think they can win that game, but the Texas game, I don't even know if we can get by that game. So
Yeah,
I would say no.
Yeah, I'm just looking at who we would potentially play in the Sweet 16 because I don't remember off the top of my head.
Xavier. Then you have could play Pitt, right? I believe they're an 11 playing game with Mississippi State. I think that's in our region. And then Iowa State, I think it's the 6.
Yeah. I think I have Iowa State going to the Sweet 16, at least in the bracket where I picked Penn State. That's what I was looking at. So yeah.
Did you pick them in a bracket to win it all?
Yeah. Why not? Because I figured, when am I going to get the chance to do this again? I've got to,
I surprisingly didn't. I think the farthest item going was the Final Four. So it's like I would be so happy with this. I wouldn't even care what happened in the Final Four.
Yeah, I figured, when am I going to get the chance to pick Penn State and see that logo next to in tournament
with a little
challenge?
confetti.
Yeah, so like I had to go for it. But yeah, I kind of agree with you. Like Elite Eight, I would be happy with the Elite Eight. Like, even if we didn't get to the Final Four, like that would just be shit. Sweet 16, I'd be happy with that.
Yes, the Sweet 16 has its own banner, so
yeah.
I've only been there twice ever, so that would be I'd be ecstatic for that.
Yeah. Yeah. So what you got for me?
All right, so mine's also basketball related since we're in the middle of
Yeah.
March. Not necessarily a yes no answer, but what do you think the expectation or I guess potential could be for the basketball program? I've always said that in a 10-year cycle, make the NCAA tournament 4 times out of 10 years, with the other 6 years. Not saying you have to make the NCAA tournament, just maybe make the NIT, be above 500, kind of like in that mix of on the bubble, I guess you should say, for most years. But at least make it once or twice every like recruiting cycle would be my one of how I would say.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. We'd have to, I mean, we're gonna find out now, like what's the commitment gonna be, like how much money are we gonna put into it, like investment, that kind of stuff. Like I think it's reasonable to expect that we should be on the bubble every year. Like not even necessarily like the last four in, first four out, but like at least in that like 8 to 12 team kind of like hanging
Mm-hmm.
around there. Like I think that's completely fair. Like you said, you do that, then yeah, you're probably gonna make it, couple times in a 10-year span. But I mean, I think that's fair. I mean, I would love it to be more consistent. Like, Ohio State usually has a consistent basketball team, Michigan too, even with these, powerhouse football programs. There's no reason why we couldn't be. It's a level of investment kind of thing. Cause in today's day and age, like, is we always talk about the state college thing kind of being a barrier and getting kids to come to the middle of nowhere and have playing in front of fans. Like, is that going to be a barrier with all this new money and all the reorganization? And like, if you're flying out to UCLA anyway, like, does it really matter? So um, I would love
The
it. I'd love it.
the basketball NIL is something that is non-existent right now, and part of what I heard was, I mean, Lundy still has a COVID year, but if he doesn't end up going pro or whatever, he might end up transferring to a different school just for the NIL aspect of it.
Yeah.
And I think it's doing well for football. From what, at least everything I've seen, they're pretty much in the top 10 for NIL for the most part. At least success with honor and all that kind of stuff is starting to pick up. But basketball has been like non-existent, and that's another thing that they're going to need to get going, especially if you want to keep Shrewsbury around. But I
Yeah.
agree with you on the bubble, which is what I said. Like, in the years you don't make it, just be in the NIT. I don't care if you're 17 and 14 like a Wisconsin or a Michigan this year. They've been on the bubble all year, but they just came up short. And at least then you're still playing some type of postseason basketball and getting some extra practices and all that kind of stuff in for your young guys, almost kind of treating it like a bowl game in a sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So, um, shoot, I had a train of thought there and I forget. Oh, NIL. The good thing is they've got a bunch of, I think, attention on that in the last week and a half with this run.
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard that there's like some crowdsourcing stuff kind of going on too that has like really stepped up over the last couple of days. So maybe we'll see. We'll
But
certainly see.
I, I've always said that with any Penn State sport, all you have to do is win and the money will show up. I
Yeah.
mean, you can, and also just the fans will show up as far as like the attendance issues too. I mean, obviously wrestling, they're winning national championships. That's a whole nother level, but there's a reason why women's volleyball gets really good crowds compared to, other sports and other teams. It's because they had that problem where they were dominant and they were fun to watch and all that kind of stuff. Even men's ice hockey, they sell out Pagula
A
every
couple times.
single game,
Yeah.
103% capacity, I think is what they averaged last year. And that team hasn't really even done too much. They won a couple Big Ten tournaments and regular seasons here and there, but for the most part, they haven't been winning national championships, but they're fun to watch and they win a decent clip, so people support them. I just think if basketball can get consistent where you're not just like, hey, where are we at in the Big Ten tournament? Oh, the 13th seed. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
if you're on the bubble every year and you have a winning record, people will be like, oh yeah, okay, I'll support them because majority of the country does like to watch college basketball, and even the casual football fans, they want to support it. They're just when it's not when they're not fun to watch and they're not good, it's like I'm not going to turn into the Big Ten Network at 7:30 on a Tuesday night.
Yep.
So
Yep. Exactly. So couldn't have said it better myself. I think we're gonna let it right there. So Stay tuned. We got some big things going on over here at Tailgate Talk, and in the next couple of weeks, I think we'll roll those out in due time. But for now, we'll leave it here. We are Tailgate Talk, and we'll see you soon.